you've just been hearing a remix of some early Throbbing Gristle stuff, Hot Heels United, I think a conflation of 2 tracks. It's the Carter Tutti remix, and I'm joined by Chris Carter and Cosey fan Tutti.
Hello.
Very, very fantastic for you to join me in the FreakZone pad.
Pleasure.
You brought a bit of music in as well.
Yeah.
But oddly, something I never thought I'd hear myself saying, we're going to be, I kind of guess, nostalgic about Throbbing Gristle. We're going to look back at 30 years.
We
almost.
thought we'd be nostalgic when we were sort of grandparents or something.
Yes.
That was the thing behind the first album, was that we'd have an album to say to our grandchildren that we once made a record.
What, you were planning that far ahead?
That was...
It didn't seem like that at the time, did it?
No, not at all.
I mean, at the time, in the late 70s, the name Throbbing Gristle brought with it an incredible amount of weight. Looking from the outside, I mean, it was to go to a Throbbing Gristle performance was quite a scary thing, and it oddly enough took a strange amount of courage for a fan to go along to a show you were putting on. But
Did you go?
Yeah, I saw you at the Crypt. Which of course I've since learned that Genesis P.O. was trying to kill himself at that particular show.
You took an overdose that night, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which leads me to the question I was going to ask about what it was actually like to be inside Throbbing Gristle at the time. With all those kind of things going on.
It was, what's that saying? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And it really was.
Yes.
It was quite scary, especially on nights like that. But
well, I wasn't scared.
When did you find out that he'd done that?
I got a phone call because I'd left him by then. That was but that's personal stuff. But I got a phone call from Helen Chadwick. I don't know if you know Helen Chadwick, the artist. She lived opposite us then in Becker Road, to tell me that Jen had taken an overdose. So I went down the hospital and met his parents and all the usual stuff that goes along with that. But yeah, it was a heavy night.
But the show went on, didn't it?
The show, well, we didn't know
at
the time. It was a fantastic show, you know. It was, and I can remember it because we took security with us that night. We actually employed security guys for the first time. We thought it would be quite a nice thing to do, you know.
Yes.
For the sort of lynch mob you get in gigs sort of thing. But you know, and it was for all sorts of reasons. It was a very weird gig, you know. But yeah, he was climbing the speakers that night.
Well, and let's try and put this in some kind of context, because I guess back in the punk days there was the notion that I remember Sniffing Glue did a fanzine, and they suggested you learnt 3 chords and therefore you could form a group. But with Throbbing Gristle, it was almost a case of you didn't need to know any chords.
No,
we were
didn't.
totally against that. We didn't see that was going to move music forward at all.
None of us could play music sort of in the conventional sense. None of us could, and that was part of the whole thing of TG, that you didn't even have to know 3 chords.
Yes.
You know, you could just press a button or
you had to approach sound as sound, not as something that you'd heard before, and then, you know, you were taught certain notes, and that's how you make this kind of chord and all the rest of it.
Because in a strange way there was I mean, it's a cliche, but there was an odd parallel with the Sex Pistols, not least with the name, funnily enough, Yorkshire term for erection. But the Throbbing Gristle side of it seemed to actually have true aesthetic power, whereas the other side of it was still rooted in rock and roll and back to the blues.
I think it was commercial, whereas TG wasn't. We were never meant to be commercial. We were meant to just sort of like make sort of rumblings and get people to sort of move away from what they would accept, you know. It's just been pumped at them, you know.
But that's always
there like
been
a sponge.
My biggest problem with punk has always been that it really is just rock and roll, sort of dressed up in a sort of fashion sort of, you know, outer sort of thing.
Well, it's the music and fashion.
It is.
It was still guitars, wasn't it?
It was,
yeah. It was.
I mean, you came from a completely different history of what music was, and in the long run, I guess, the Throbbing Gristle version of what the history of pop music was has turned out to be more legitimate in a way. The appropriation of electronic instruments, the appropriation of sound, of rhythm, of remixes, of the idea of manipulation, all sorts of noises.
Yeah.
Well, we said it was more like the classical music of the 20th century, really, because you took from what was available around you every day, which we did, literally.
We did a lot of sampling and stuff.
We worked in a studio that was surrounded in an old factory, which was surrounded by other factories, and the tube station, you know, up the road. So we took the sounds that we heard every day and made music from it.
And I guess almost doomed to failure instantly, almost as soon as you gave it a name, in a way. It became industrial, didn't it? Because you called it Industrial Records, your label.
Yep.
I believe it was originally going to be called Factory Records.
It was.
And Factory.
Tony sort of hijacked the name.
But by giving it that name, and oddly enough, by having a kind of success, the idea of the project of Throbbing Gristle was kind of doomed, wasn't it?
Well, it was, because
it
like
was.
we were saying with punk, it was still iconographic punk. You still had like Johnny Rotten there to sell the product and the music and everything. With TG, that it was totally an alien from that. That's what we criticised about it. And really it was a way of getting people to do things for themselves. It sounds like a really old sort of hippie type philosophy, really, but it wasn't. It was grounded in reality, and and immediately people started making us icons. That's when the mission was terminated. When they turned up at the Lyceum with industrial clothing on, we did like 20 minutes choral and then a 20-minute discipline track.
Yes.
Because Spandau Ballet and all that turned up. We thought, well, this is the end of TG.
Yes, there was a moment you were on the edge of
suddenly get fashionable. Yeah. That's when we've got to stop.
So it was like a 5-year intense period, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And originally coming out of Coombe Transmissions, which was much more freighted over to the art side.
That's right.
And by entering into music, did you feel that ultimately that compromised the spirit of the message, or did it help you by creating a soundtrack to some of the ideas you were exploring?
You'd always use music, even in Coombe, didn't you?
We didn't use language in Coombe because immediately you couldn't go to Germany and they'd understand what you were trying to get across in an art performance piece, so we never used language in that way. So we'd already experimented with music and done art performances with contact mics on and all this kind of thing. So it was just a natural progression for us, really. And we met Chris and he was building his own gear, which was fantastic for us because nothing that we could go and get would do what we wanted to do. And so we all got together. It was just, formed itself in a lot of ways.
Yes. And did you really kind of feel that what you were doing was in any way important, or were you just living minute to minute? I mean, what kind of atmosphere was there within the group at the time?
It was difficult financially for all of us, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, most of us had day jobs to support what we were doing. And we were, in a sense, making it up as we went along.
Yes.
Just seeing what happened and...
But is this uncompromising spirit ultimately? Is it an incredibly sophisticated response to environment, or is it extremely naive ultimately? I mean, there was no chance of any kind of artistic success ultimately because you were constantly defeating yourself in a way.
No, because we were always on the outside wherever we were, even as Coombe Transmissions. Although we received Arts Council grants, we were perceived as being outsiders within the art world because we didn't go to art college. We didn't have the certificate to carry around and present at exhibitions, but we were still representing Britain.
And the same in the music world.
And the same in the music world. It was still legitimate but illegitimate, if you know what I mean.
Because we weren't a punk band, we weren't a conventional band by any means. And in fact, punk audiences didn't like us at all, did we? We had most of our trouble at gigs from punk audiences, didn't we?
Yeah, there was a lot of violence at gigs in the beginning,
Well, it was funny because in a way what you were actually about was meaning and playing with meaning, and everyone else liked to sort of dabble in that, but you were actually doing it for real. It was very hardcore.
Yeah, we like to get our hands dirty completely, because then you go in front of a university audience and they're so jaded. Now it's even worse. They stand there and just like, okay, impress me. I've seen it all, I've done it all, I'm learning about it as well,
Yes.
So we'd go and just barrage them, and it was a thing of breaking down every preconception people came to a gig with, and then start building up from there. Yes. And that's what we wanted to do.
Okay, well, we'll carry on talking about the strange history of Throbbing Gristle, but first let's play a piece of music, one of the pieces that you've brought in to show us your influences or what you're liking at the moment. What are we going to play first?
Joe Meek.
Joe Meek?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Explain this one.
I Hear a New World. We had a cassette of this years ago in TG, and I don't know where it came from. It was a bootleg of a bootleg. And it had these incredible sounds on, and then you hear it. I mean, we thought it was contemporary at the time, and then someone said, no, this was made in 1962, and you think, what? This is incredible. And you associate the name Joe Meek with, like, Telstar and all those other sort of 60s hits, but he actually had this other side to him. We had many sides to him, but he had this avant-garde side, and he was incessantly experimenting, and he was making weird machines and experimenting with tape loops and reverbs and delays, and he actually made this album that was a total flop called I Hear a New World, and this is a track from that, the title track, and it's absolutely incredible for the time, way ahead of its time.
It's Joe Meek, I Hear a New World from 1962, the first choice of Chris Carter and Cosey Fan Tutti. Throbbing Gristle were talking about an album of remixes of Throbbing Gristle stuff called Mutant TG and other stuff. It's funny hearing Joe Meek experiment with sound back in the early 60s, because also if you think about some of the classical composers who'd been experimented with sound, and Stockhausens and the Cases, etc., in the weird way that those two areas overlap, which I always felt in the more sounds an odd phrase, musical side of Throbbing Gristle was something that was kind of interesting, what you were doing in the 70s, where those two kind of areas met, pop people experimenting with sound and classical people experimenting with sound.
Yeah, I think that came from like each of us individually, from things that we were into, you know, and you brought all your Germeek and stuff, and Sleazy was into John Barry.
We had quite diverse tastes.
Yeah, it was really, and then the obvious Velvet Underground and all this kind of stuff.
Because there's always a feeling when people talk about the music for Throbbing Gristle that it was punishing noise.
Not all the time.
Not all the time. As much as there was that, there was also an incredible amount of stuff that fitted into a world of Can and Kraftwerk, etc. I mean, you were also in that area. Was that because of the four very distinctive personalities bringing in their stuff into the group?
Yeah, our individual influences, you know, had an effect on the overall sound, and the way the sound was built up was from those elements of what we were listening to in, you know, day-to-day life. I was into Can, Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, things like that.
I hadn't listened to them.
And Cosey hadn't even heard of half of these bands.
Yeah.
Sleazy was into, you know, Sleazy was into what, John Barry, lounge music, Les Baxter, Martin Denny.
But a lot of it came from also the subject matter of the tracks that we did, like Hamburger Lady. The sound from that was like, right, the concept is, we imagine, because she was a real person, a friend of ours, a nurse in America, looked after her. And
she was a burns victim.
She was a burns victim, so it all came from that and his experience of nursing her. And so we said, right, the concept is she's laid in the bed and all she hears, because she can't move, is the noise of the cleaners, the vacuum cleaner in the morning, and all these little noises coming through. And then on top of that, some kind of sounds to sort of represent her discomfort and pain and her situation. And that's what we did with just about all tracks that had a subject matter like that. But Wall of Noise was just like, that was punishment.
Yes.
At the end of the gig, when you usually get the hit as the encore,
yes,
you got a wall of sound instead.
You're talking about that kind of thing. The Lyceum, you went on first as well, didn't you?
We did.
Yeah,
we insisted.
where we reversed
even though you were topping the bill, you went on first to get the true
There were
fans.
practical reasons for that as well, because
the gear would fall apart.
No. I mean, a lot of the gear we were using was handmade, custom built by me, and it was literally held together with gaffer tape and sellotape and stuff. And if you go on first, you get to sound check last. So we could, when we did the sound check, we set everything up and everything was working. And we thought, well, if we move some of this, it might not work again by the time we go on. So he said, right, we'll have to play first. And that's what we did.
We like the idea as well.
And yes, yeah, it was a perverse sort of thing anyway, because a lot of people...
You come too late, you miss the beat.
A lot of people turned up sort of, you know, fashionably late, and we finished.
Talking of the word perverse, how perverse were you really? I mean, the reputation of Throbbing Gristle, I mean, now it's a lot calmer and we can have a nice, pleasant conversation of an evening. But at the time, I mean, did you feel disturbed yourself by some of the things that were going on, by the reaction to what you were doing, or
that was reaction, what was perverse to us. What we did, we didn't see anything perverse about it.
We couldn't understand people's reactions quite
and
often.
when we go out and do a gig, we sort of think, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, seriously, I mean, you know, we couldn't understand why, and that interested us, that we could go down a certain road and yet it was unacceptable for some people. You know, you think, well, even the name alone, we thought was funny. And we thought, what is the name of a band that you wouldn't want to say if you went in a record shop and said, have you got the new song by Throbbing Gristle, please? That's why we chose it. It was the most uncool name we could come up with. So we were playing with the whole music and rock star thing as well.
Let's move on to your second piece of music that you've chosen for us to listen to in the FreakZone pad on 6 Music, Sigur Rós.
Yeah.
Do you feel with bands like Sigur Rós, do you feel that they're aware of Throbbing Gristle and what they do? I mean, you know, even just in terms of the way that they appear not to appear, if you see what I mean. There's certain sort of senses they come out of your tradition.
I'd not like to think. I think there is some influence there, even if it may be unconscious. I don't know because I haven't met them. But I think the way they put music together, you know, sort of, I think that could be down to what we've left behind, our legacy or whatever.
Yes. Sigur Rós, Untitled. We just heard the beautiful Sigur Rós, Untitled, obviously. Hearing music like that, does it feel like, in a way, the rest of the world has kind of caught up with Throbbing Gristle, and in a way, is that a sadness to you that suddenly what you were doing now almost seems ordinary.
In this instance, I think it's great because they've taken whatever Throbbing Gristle provided towards the approach to using sound and done it in their own way. What I don't like is when you get loads of CDs or cassettes, which we do, all four of us get sent them, of industrial music,
Sure.
you know.
So-called industrial.
Yeah, and it just underlines, when you hear something like that, it underlines what we meant industrial to mean, which was the approach to using sound.
Yes.
It's industrious and it's moving forward.
Sure.
It's not industrial sounds as such, you know.
Do you think a lot of those kind of groups have missed the humour, the multi-dimensional qualities of Throbbing Gristle?
And they missed the philosophy on that level, I think. I think they thought we were just, like I said before, anarchists of some kind in the music world. Or that were into magic and stuff like that, and sex deviancy and that sort of thing. Nothing to do with that. It's your attitude to life, is that, you know, you're here to live it and move forward and not stand still.
I always felt amidst all the mess of the myth, if you like, that you were celebrating beauty ultimately.
Yeah, we were.
Right?
And you can celebrate beauty by presenting the horrors of life, because if you haven't got one, there is no comparison, you know.
Sure.
And that's what we were about. We weren't about sort of cracking on the head with a hammer, you know.
I mean, industrial bands nowadays, contemporary industrial bands, do take it far too literally, just the whole genre. And it has become this sort of Frankenstein monster that we don't recognise anymore.
Yes.
And I'd be quite happy, you know, for an industrial band to come along that would take over from where TG left off, but there isn't one, and I can't see any coming out of the woodwork. It's a shame. I'd be quite happy to let someone else take that on, because, you know, we're getting on a bit and we were going to retire at some point. And it'd be nice if someone could carry that mantle.
Yes.
But it's not happening as far as we're concerned.
I mean, it's been a long time since Throbbing Gristle sort of enacted anything as a unit, but you are now at the moment, because in a way of these re-releases, beginning to do new things and be Throbbing Gristle again.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, is that not an undermining of the original philosophy in the way the £250,000 turnover was? Is there a downside to the legitimisation, if you like, of Throbbing Gristle?
No, what it is we're not reforming, we're regrouping just for a one-off event at Canberra Sands in May. But the whole thing behind us getting together at all was that we were being bootlegged left, right and centre all the time. And it was trashing our legacy, to be honest. So we said, look, we have to, you know, take control of this and get some quality control in there again.
Yes.
And that's why we did it, because people were beginning to misunderstand what TG were about and the industrial genre as such as it was initially conceived. So we want to put forward that and celebrate the fact that some people have taken up the mantle, like Chris said, and moved forward, but with their own music and their own attitude to it, and that's what we love. So the thing at Canberra Sands is a celebration of TG and everything of value or whatever that's come after it, people that have really taken off from there.
You're trying to control your own history rather than let other people do it.
Well, yeah, exactly, because, I mean, I know you can't 100%, but you have to at some point stand up and say, look, you're getting it wrong, and we're still here to do that, so we can do it. And it's not a nostalgic look back at TG, what we're doing at Canberra Sands. People misconceive the whole gig thing.
So what can we expect?
Have to
The
wait and see, I'm
unexpected, I
afraid.
suppose.
Are you looking forward to it?
We are.
Yeah, we are.
Because I felt for years, I mean, literally decades, that the four of you weren't really speaking. Was there,
three of us were.
Right.
Yeah.
Genesis was on the outside of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For various reasons.
I mean, in that sense, a classic rock group breakup.
It was a classic rock group breakup.
Just look like that, doesn't it? Oh, we've done something normal. Oh dear.
But we're building bridges now.
Okay.
It's working out, you know, fine. And we're happy to work together.
And you talk about legacy, and again, it's something I never thought I'd say to members of Throbbing Gristle, but looking back now, are you kind of proud of that? I mean, I know the things you've done since as Chris and Cosey, again in their own way incredibly influential, but just looking at Throbbing Gristle for the moment, incredibly proud in the end of the integrity and the influence that it's had.
I am, personally. I mean, I'm in print saying that I am proud to have been part of that. And I'm happy I was part of that, even though it was quite traumatising, some of it.
But good things never come easy.
No, they don't. Yeah,
I don't think.
Well, one of the pleasures of being a Throbbing Gristle fan in the late 70s was as punishing as it could be and as scary as it could be. And I say that looking in your eyes because I want some help. Some of the great pleasures there was when you saw the entertaining side of Throbbing Gristle.
Yeah.
The fact you called, for me, one of your finest album, one of the greatest albums of all time, Throbbing Gristle's 20 Jazz Funk Greats, the title, and the cover, it was such a brilliant cover. The four of you smiling, looking moderately normal, quite sexy even, and I'm not just talking about Cosey, there was an incredible sort of boyish glamour about the group. Tell us something about that cover, the 20 Jazz Funk Greats, where the four of you are standing on a cliff at the edge of England, the edge of life almost, but smiling.
It's at Beachy Head for one thing, which is the suicide spot.
Right.
So we went and did the pastiche cover there. So it's a very loaded image in lots of ways. But the original concept of the cover was that we saw in a Woolworths bargain bin 20 Jazz Funk Greats or whatever, the greatest hits ever, and we thought, I'm sure a TG album's going to end up in a bargain bin, you know, in Woolworths at one time. Yeah. So let's do a cover to suit it so that when it's in there it looks in place.
Yes.
And that's why we did it. Fantastic. But we gave it twists, you know.
Of course.
And I know it's Sleazy. He's got a nice pair of shoes on.
He has. Yeah, his Italian shoes bought specially for the occasion. But nearly cost him his life.
Yeah.
Well, anybody tempted to go over the edge?
Sleazy was,
yeah. He was in control of the remote button on the camera, and so when he put his Italian shoes on it, he missed slightly, went down a rabbit hole, nearly went over Beachy Head. So, but all three of us were just stood there laughing, but as you would, you know. But no, he was okay.
Well, Chris and Cosey, thanks very much for coming in. The guests in the FreakZone pad, playing some music, talking about your extraordinary history, a little bit of your extraordinary history. Good luck at Canberra Sands. That's 14th to 16th of May 2004. Tickets going well, no doubt.
Yeah, they are.
And there's an extraordinary bill of like-minded spirits on with you.
Yeah, and art performance pieces, also, all kinds of things.
And basically, I think you would probably have to stay awake for at least 24 hours during it to experience its full value.
Yeah.
And the remix thing, Mutant Throbbing Gristle, where you're legitimised by kind of the guy out of Basement Jacks has done, Ratcliffe has done a mix, Carl Craig, Two Lone Swordsmen, and indeed yourselves. But I think we're going to finish with a track from the classic 20 Jazz Funk Greats, Throbbing Gristle. Chris and Cosey, thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.